The first time Hank Lawson saw her, she was standing in the middle of the road, squinting into the setting sun, her arms wrapped tight around herself like the breeze might steal her away. She couldn't have been older than 7, hair tangled, dusty boots barely holding together, and eyes far too old for her face. Hank pulled his wagon to a stop, the wheels creaking loud in the quiet. She didn't flinch, just stepped forward like she'd been waiting for him all day. "Can you help me find my mama?" she asked. Her voice didn't tremble, but something inside Hank did. He didn't know what to say. Something about the way she looked at him, like she wasn't asking for a favor, but giving him a chance to do the right thing, rattled him. She was small, frail. Her dress was torn at the hem, dirty as the trail itself, and she had a bruise darkening just under her jaw. Hank knew a bruise like that, knew the kind of hand it came from, and he hated that he knew. He hadn't planned on stopping. Hell, he hadn't planned on staying anywhere for longer than a night since Martha passed. 3 years now, and he still couldn't bear the sound of his own voice echoing off cabin walls with no one there to answer. So he kept moving. Work here, a night in a barn there. Folks stopped asking if he was doing all right after the first year. They knew the answer. But this little girl didn't know anything about him, didn't know about Martha, or the baby they'd lost before the war even ended. She didn't know about the fight he'd walked away from, the friends buried in muddy fields, or how many nights he'd spent staring at the stars wondering why he was still alive when so many better men weren't. She just needed someone. The road behind her stretched out into the hills, empty and quiet, no wagon tracks, no sign of other travelers. Just dust and wind and that sinking feeling in Hank's chest. He climbed down without saying a word, offered her the last half of a dry biscuit from his coat pocket. She looked at it like it was gold, ate it slow. "What's your name?" he asked. "Daisy." He nodded once. "You got a last name?" "Don't know," she said. Her face didn't change, like that was just the way things were. Like it didn't matter. The town of Ash Bluff was still an hour's ride east, tucked in the basin of the hills like it was trying to hide from the world. Hank hadn't planned on stopping there again. Too many memories. Too many people who still looked at him like he might break if they said the wrong thing. But now Daisy sat on the edge of his wagon's seat, feet swinging, hands gripping the side like she was bracing for a storm. And Hank couldn't bring himself to leave her alone again. Ash Bluff hadn't changed much since he last passed through. Main Street was still dust-covered and tired. The general store leaned left like it might give up one of these days. And the church still rang its bell every evening, even though the pews hadn't been full in years. Folks paused when they saw Hank's wagon roll in. Some nodded. Others just stared. Daisy looked down at her hands. Hank saw the way she curled her fingers in, hiding the dirt under her nails. He parked outside the livery and helped her down. "We'll get a warm meal," he said. "Then we'll ask around about your mama." She didn't smile, just nodded, like she didn't believe him, but hoped maybe he was right. At the saloon, Miss Trudy gave Daisy a long look before sliding a plate of stew and cornbread in front of her. She didn't ask questions, just filled Hank's coffee and said, "You still got a good heart, Hank Lawson, no matter how much you try to bury it." He didn't answer, just watched Daisy eat like she hadn't had a proper meal in days. Later, after the sun dipped behind the hills and the town settled into quiet, Hank took her to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Boone was younger than Hank remembered, just a kid when Hank left for the war. Now he wore the badge like it belonged to someone else, his eyes sharp and tired. "You find her on the road?" Boone asked. "She found me," Hank said. Boone crouched in front of Daisy. "What's your mama's name, sweetheart?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I just remember she smelled like lemons." That was it. No last name, no town, no kin. Just lemons, and an ache in her voice that made Hank's throat tighten. Boone scratched his chin. Could be she wandered from one of the mining camps. Some of those women don't stay long. Hank bristled. "She's not some stray dog, Boone." "I didn't say she was." But Hank could hear it. The judgment. The dismissal. Like Daisy wasn't worth the trouble. Back at the boarding house, Daisy sat on the edge of the bed, fingers twisting the hem of her dress. Hank sat in the chair by the window, the old wood groaning beneath him. He could hear the wind picking up, blowing dust down the alley. "You remember anything else?" he asked. "She used to hum," Daisy said. "A song I don't know the name of. She held my hand real tight when it was cold. Her eyes were wide, staring at nothing. Then one day, she wasn't there." Hank swallowed hard. He wanted to say it'd be all right, but he'd said that before, and it hadn't been true. He didn't sleep much that night. Kept thinking about the way Daisy had climbed into bed without being told, like she was used to strange places, like she'd learned how to survive on her own. That kind of learning came with scars. In the morning, he walked her down to the schoolhouse. Miss Genevieve, the teacher, had soft eyes and a sharper tongue. "She don't have papers?" she asked. "No," Hank said, "but she's bright, and she's got nowhere else to be." Genevieve looked at Daisy for a long time. "You vouch for her?" Hank nodded. "Then she can sit in the back." Daisy didn't say much when he left her there. Just waved once, small and unsure. Hank stood outside the schoolhouse a long while after the door closed. The sound of children's voices muffled behind the walls. He didn't know what he was doing. Didn't know why he cared so much about a little girl who wasn't his, whose mama might never be found. But something about the way she looked at him, like she was trying not to hope too hard, made him want to try. That afternoon, Hank walked to the sheriff's office again. "You hear anything?" he asked. Boone shook his head. "Nobody's looking for a girl like her. No posters. No writers. No word. She didn't just appear out of thin air." Boone leaned back in his chair. "Some folks don't want to be found. Others don't care if they lose someone along the way." Hank clenched his fists. "She's just a child." Boone sighed. "I know, but I got no leads, Hank. You want to keep her safe? You might be the only one who can." Hank didn't say anything, just walked out into the dust. By the time the sun set again, he'd bought her a new pair of shoes, a brush for her hair, and a quilt from old Mrs. Platt's shop. He told himself it was temporary, just until someone came looking. But deep down, Hank knew no one was coming. And somehow, that little girl had found her way into the quiet, broken place inside him that he'd thought would stay empty forever. Ash Bluff had always been a town where folks kept to themselves. Tight smiles, polite nods, and enough silence to bury all kinds of sins. It didn't take long for word to spread that Hank Lawson had taken in a girl no one claimed. Some folks nodded with quiet respect. Others whispered behind curtains, wondering why a drifter would suddenly play father to a child that wasn't his. Daisy settled into a rhythm fast, like she'd been waiting for something steady her whole life. At school, she kept her head down but listened to every word Miss Genevieve said. At night, she ate quietly and slept without complaint, though Hank noticed she still woke up some nights clutching her pillow, breath caught her throat. She never asked for comfort. He offered it anyway, sometimes just sitting beside her until she drifted off again. Genevieve became one of the first to soften. She'd been teaching in Ash Bluff for years, unmarried, childless, and used to the ache of loneliness that came with it. Watching Daisy each day, so careful, so eager to please, stirred something in her that had been quiet a long time. One afternoon after school, she pulled Hank aside. "She's bright, picks up faster than most, but there's something in her eyes, like she's waiting for the floor to drop." Hank nodded. "She's been through more than she says." Genevieve hesitated. "She trusts you, though. Don't take that lightly." He didn't. Every time Daisy looked up at him like he was solid ground, Hank felt it, pressure in his chest, like he was being given something he didn't deserve. But not everyone in Ash Bluff was as kind. One morning, Daisy came home from school with her lips split and her books torn. Hank knelt down, quiet fury simmering behind his calm face. "Who did this?" She shook her head. "It's fine. It was just words. Words don't break skin. I'm not going to cry about it." Hank didn't push. But that night, he visited Sheriff Boone and asked who had sons in Daisy's school class. Boone leaned back in his chair. "You thinking of taking a strap to somebody's boy?" "If I hear he touches her again," Hank said, voice low, "you won't need to ask." Boone sighed. "Careful, Hank. You start swinging. People remember the man you used to be." and they won't like him coming back. But Hank wasn't the only one keeping an eye on Daisy. There was a woman named Clara Beckett who ran the local boarding house with a tight jaw and sharper instincts. Her late husband had been a gambler, and Clara had survived Offerwitz long before he died in a card game outside of town. She didn't trust people easily, and she definitely didn't trust men who wandered in and out of Ash Bluff with ghosts in their eyes. "I saw that girl looking at the map on my wall the other day," Clara said one evening while pouring coffee for Hank, tracing her finger down the trail roads, like she's trying to remember something. Hank paused. "She hasn't said anything to me." "She won't. Not yet." Clara studied him. "You ever think she might be looking for more than just her mama?" He didn't answer, but the question stayed with him. Then there was Levi Turner, a man who ran freight between Ash Bluff and towns west of the pass. Tall, thin, with a mouth full of stories and a smile that never reached his eyes. He stopped by Hank's wagon one morning while Daisy helped brush the mule. "She's a quiet one," Levi said. "You sure she's not someone else's trouble?" Hank didn't look up. "She's not trouble. Didn't say she was. Just saying, girls like that don't end up alone by accident." Something in Levi's tone made Hank stiffen, like he knew something but was waiting to see how much Hank knew first. "Where were you riding last month?" Hank asked without looking at him. "Why? You passed by the old mining camps?" Levi gave a slow smile. "Maybe, but those camps are nothing but rot and ash now. If someone left her there, they didn't mean for her to survive." It was the way he said it. Too casual, too smooth. That night, Hank pulled out the old map Clara mentioned. He spread on the table and watched Daisy's eyes shift toward it. "Which road were you on when you found me?" she asked. "The West Trail. You came out of nowhere." She stared at the map. "I remember a tall hill. And a burned wagon. I think there was a dog once. A small one." Her voice cracked a little at the end. Hank leaned forward. "Was your mama with you there?" Daisy was quiet. "There were men. They were loud. Mama told me to hide. Then I heard shooting." Hank reached across the table and put his hand gently over hers. "You're safe now. You don't have to remember everything all at once." But she was remembering, slowly, in pieces, and it scared her. A week later, Levi Turner left town, heading west again. Daisy watched him from the school window. That night, she didn't eat much. When Hank asked why, she said, "I think I've seen him before." But he didn't have a beard then. The blood drained from Hank's face. He didn't sleep that night. Just sat by the window, rifle across his knees, heart beating like a war drum. The next day, he rode out to one of the old camps, what used to be called Black Hollow, now just charred timber and shattered bottles. It was where men disappeared, where women were sold or discarded, where no law dared set foot. And it was where Hank found a scorched handkerchief with a faint lemon scent still clinging to it. His stomach turned. He rode back hard, anger rising like a storm. Clara stopped him outside the boarding house. "You're not thinking straight, Hank. I think that man Levi knew more than he said. Then make sure you know what you're doing before you go picking a fight you can't win." But Hank was already boiling inside, because someone had left Daisy behind like she didn't matter. And someone was still out there who remembered the day she disappeared. And whoever it was, whatever they wanted, Hank had a feeling they weren't done looking for her either. The quiet of Ash Bluff didn't last. After Levi Turner disappeared down the Western Trail, something changed. Daisy started waking in the middle of the night more often, eyes wide, heart pounding, muttering things in her sleep she didn't remember come morning. She would cry sometimes, but didn't want to be held. She just needed to know Hank was in the room, that he wasn't leaving. One morning, she refused to go to school. Said her stomach hurt, but there was no fever, no sign of sickness. Hank sat beside her, trying to coax her out of the bed. "You can tell me, Daisy." She stared at the floor. "What if the men find me?" she whispered. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. What men? The ones from before. One of them had a scar across his neck, like someone tried to cut his head off but didn't finish. Hank's stomach turned. That was no small-town drunk or lazy outlaw. A scar like that came from another kind of life, vicious, brutal, and Daisy remembered it. That meant they were real. That day, he went to Boone. You know anyone with a scar across his throat? Boone gave him a look. You trying to drag ghosts out of the hills? I think someone's following us. Or watching. You got proof? No, Hank said. But I've got a little girl too scared to sleep. And if she's right, someone out there already tried to kill her mother. Boone leaned forward, the lazy edge in his voice gone. You think Levi's tied to it? I think he knew more than he let on. The sheriff frowned. Then we got a problem. Word is, Levi ain't just a freight runner. He's a link between camps. Used to deal with the wrong kinds of folks. Move people, not just goods. You mean trafficking? Boone nodded grimly. Women. Sometimes children. Hank felt like the floor dropped under him. He wanted to be sick. Back at the boarding house, Clara was waiting. Heard you asking about scars and men in shadows, she said. You stir up something? Hank hesitated, then said quietly, Daisy remembers more than she lets on, and she's scared someone's coming for her. Clara nodded slowly. Then you'd better be ready, because if someone knows she's alive and that she saw what happened, they won't let her stay that way. That night, Hank loaded his rifle and locked every door and window. Daisy slept in the cot beside his bed, her small frame curled tight, clutching the stuffed rabbit Miss Genevieve had given her. He didn't sleep at all. The twist came 2 days later, when a mail rider brought a folded letter sealed in black wax. It wasn't addressed to Hank. It wasn't addressed at all. Just a message scrawled in block letters. We know she's alive. You know where to bring her. There was no signature, just a location, Black Hollow. Midnight. Hank's hands trembled. Clara read the note over his shoulder, jaw tight. They think you'll hand her over, she said. I'm not going to. You go out there alone, you're not coming back. Hank looked over at Daisy, who was sitting on the steps, staring at the dusty road like she expected her past to come walking down it. I've already come back from worse, he said. Boone wasn't thrilled when Hank brought him the note. This is a trap, he said flatly. They'll kill you both. I don't think they want her dead. Not yet. She saw something, maybe something they buried, something they need to erase completely. Boone looked down at the letter again. We should send a posse. They'll smell that coming. They'll vanish again, and we'll never find them. Boone shook his head. You planning to trade your life for hers? No, Hank said. I'm planning to make sure no child ever ends up in their hands again. Boone stared at him for a long time, then said, I'll be nearby, but you'll have to go in first. Hank spent the next day preparing. He didn't let Daisy out of his sight. When she asked what was wrong, he sat down beside her and told her everything. The note, the camp, the men who hurt her mother. She didn't cry, just stared straight ahead. Mama told me to be quiet and not move, no matter what. I hid under the wagon for hours. But I saw them. I saw them laugh when she screamed. Hank swallowed hard. I'm going to stop them, Daisy. But I need you to trust me. I need you to be strong. I'm already strong, she whispered. That night, under a moon that barely lit the road, Hank rode toward Black Hollow. He wore black, carried his rifle, and tucked a pistol in his belt. Boone and 2 deputies waited half a mile behind, hidden in the hills. When he reached the clearing, the burned-out ruins looked even worse by moonlight. The silence felt heavier than usual. Then a voice. You came alone. Hank turned slowly. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. Levi was one of them. The other 2 were rougher, one tall with a jagged scar across his throat, just like Daisy said. The 3rd man had eyes too calm for what he was. A leader, Hank thought. The kind who never got his hands dirty, but ordered worse. I don't see the girl, the leader said. She's not yours to take, Hank replied. She's a witness. And a product. One we were planning to sell until her mother interfered. Hank felt rage rise, steady and cold. You killed her. She was warned. Hank stepped forward. You're not leaving here. The man with the scar laughed. You in what army? Right on cue, Boone fired the first shot from the ridge. Chaos exploded. Hank dove behind a fallen beam, returning fire as the scarred man charged. Bullets flew in every direction. One deputy went down screaming. Another pinned Levi behind a tree. Hank faced the scarred man alone. They crashed into each other, fists flying, wrestling in the dirt. The man was stronger, but Hank had fury behind him. Years of guilt, loss, and now the image of a little girl who trusted him to come back. He struck with everything he had. The man went down. Behind him, Boone tackled the leader, cuffing him with blood on his mouth and gravel in his teeth. Levi tried to run, but Hank caught him with the butt of his rifle, sending him crashing to the ground. When it was done, the clearing was silent again, except for the ragged breaths of the living. "You all right?" Boone asked, bleeding from his shoulder. "Not yet," Hank said. He looked toward the horizon. Dawn was just starting to break. Back in Ash Bluff, Daisy stood at the edge of town, holding Clara's hand, waiting. When she saw Hank riding back, dirty, bloodied, but alive, she ran for him. He climbed down, dropped to one knee, and caught her in his arms. "You came back," she whispered. "I always will." And in that moment, something shifted. The past hadn't let go of either of them. But they weren't running anymore. They were fighting, together. And for the first time in years, Hank felt like he had something worth fighting for again. The town of Ash Bluff was quiet in the days after Black Hollow. But it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that settled after a storm, when people walked slower, talked softer, and didn't look one another in the eye too long. They all heard what happened. Rumors spread quick in a town like that. Some said Hank Lawson had gone mad with grief and bloodlust. Others whispered he'd uncovered something ugly that had been festering too close for too long. No matter what they believed, one thing was certain. Ash Bluff wasn't the same anymore. Neither was Hank. Boone arrested the three men and locked them in the town jail. The townsfolk came by and stared through the bars, trying to understand how monsters could have been living so near. The man with the scar never spoke a word, just stared back like he was already making plans for what came next. The leader, slick and calm, tried to talk his way out. "I'm not the enemy," he told Boone. "I'm a businessman." Boone didn't respond. He just slammed the cell shut harder than necessary and walked away. But Levi was the one who shook things loose. During questioning, he gave up names, buyers' camps, routes. He had nothing left to lose and everything to fear. "They'll kill me in that cell," he told Hank, pale and sweating. "They have people everywhere. You think it ends with me?" He was right. It didn't end in Ash Bluff. It just started there. Hank sat on the boarding house porch that evening, rifle leaning beside him. His knuckles were bruised, his eyes sunken from days of little sleep. Daisy sat by his feet, picking at a piece of cloth she was trying to stitch into a doll's dress. She hadn't spoken much since the raid. She'd seen too much, heard too much. The truth came hard. Her mama was never coming back. The men who killed her weren't strangers anymore. And the only safe place she knew now lived in the shadow of that pain. "I don't want to go to school anymore," she finally said. Hank looked down. "Why not? Everyone stares at me, like they're waiting for me to break." "You're stronger than they think." "I don't want to be strong. I want to be normal." He didn't know what to say. There wasn't an answer that could fix that kind of hurt. But he reached out and took her hand anyway, and she didn't pull away. That was something. Miss Genevieve stopped by later that night. She stood at the edge of the porch like she wasn't sure she was welcome. "She needs structure," she said. "Something that reminds her she's a child." "She's seen things a child never should," Hank replied. "All the more reason. Let me come by and teach her at home. Quietly. One-on-one." He nodded slowly. "She trusts you." Genevieve sat beside Daisy and spoke gently. Daisy didn't say much, but she listened. It was a start. Meanwhile, Clara Beckett had her hands full trying to keep the town from falling apart. Families who'd once sent their sons to the mining camps were now afraid to leave town at all. Some men pulled their daughters from school. Others rode out, looking for anyone connected to the trafficking ring. Boone did his best to keep order, but fear made people reckless. One evening, Boone found a man hanging from the windmill outside town. A sign around his neck read, "He knew and did nothing." No one claimed responsibility. No one even knew if the man was guilty. But the message was clear. Ash Bluff wasn't waiting on the law anymore. It was unraveling. Hank knew something had to be done. He met Boone outside the jail one morning, jaw tight. "They're coming," he said. "Someone's going to try and get those men out. Or kill them." Boone nodded. "That's why we're moving them. Tomorrow morning. Federal marshals are coming through. We're putting them on the stage and out of our hands." "Can't come soon enough," Hank muttered. But the fear wouldn't let go. Every sound felt like a warning. Every stranger who rode into town got watched too closely. Daisy didn't sleep. She flinched at loud voices. And Hank, he felt like he was walking through smoke, never knowing where the next blow would come from. Then came the letter, slipped under the boarding house door, addressed to Daisy in careful script. Hank opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You took what was ours. You think you're heroes. But every hero's story ends the same. We're coming for her. You can't watch her forever." There was no name, just an imprint of a black ring in the corner. Hank recognized it. So did Clara. It was the mark used by one of the oldest transport lines in the West. Now a front for trafficking, extortion, and murder. This wasn't just about 3 men in jail. It was about something bigger, something wide and deep, rooted in the bones of towns like Ash Bluff. "You need to leave," Clara told Hank. "I'm not running." "You're not running. You're protecting her." "Where would we even go?" Clara hesitated. "There's a place in Kansas. A woman named Rose takes in children like Daisy. Keeps them hidden. Safe." Daisy walked in just then, holding her doll. "I don't want to leave." Hank turned. "They'll come for you. You saw too much." Her voice was low. "If we leave, they win. You're a child. I'm your child now." That brought Hank to his knees. He pulled her into his arms and held her like she might disappear. Her words broke him wide open. He'd built walls around his heart since the day he buried Martha. But Daisy walked right through them like she'd lived there all along. Still, he knew what had to be done. The next day, Boone gathered the prisoners, shackled and scowling, and prepared the transfer. Hank rode ahead with Daisy tucked under a blanket in the wagon, heart pounding in his chest. Clara and Genevieve watched from the edge of town. The stage rolled out at dawn, and that's when the trap sprung. 3 masked riders came from the east, guns drawn, firing at the wheels. The horses screamed. The driver fell dead. Hank dove from the wagon, pulling Daisy behind cover. Boone returned fire, the deputies shouting. One of the riders was hit. The other 2 retreated, but not before throwing a burning lantern at the stage. It exploded into flame. Smoke choked the air as the jail wagon burned. The prisoners inside screamed. One died. The leader survived, barely. But the message was clear. They weren't just trying to silence Daisy anymore. They wanted to send a warning. Hank stood beside the burning wreck, chest heaving, face dark with soot. Boone clutched his bleeding arm and cursed under his breath. "They won't stop." "No," Hank said. "They won't." He looked down at Daisy. She didn't cry, just stared at the flames, her jaw tight. That night, Hank sat by the fire and spoke quietly to her. "You didn't ask for any of this." "I'm still glad I found you," she said. He looked at her, this small, battered girl with the soul of someone who had survived too much, and felt something inside him settle. Not peace, but purpose. "We'll leave soon," he said. "Not because we're afraid, because we're smart. But one day, when it's safe, we'll come back." "To Ash Bluff." "No," he said. "To every place like it. And we'll make sure no one forgets what was done here." Daisy nodded. "I'll remember." They stayed one last night in the town. Boone came by, shoulder wrapped, and offered Hank a quiet handshake. "Keep her safe," he said. Clara gave Daisy a small satchel with her initials stitched on it. "So you remember who you are." Genevieve hugged her long and whispered, "You matter, no matter what the world says." The next morning, before the sun rose, Hank hitched the wagon. Daisy climbed beside him, rabbit in her arms, bag at her feet. As the wheels turned down the trail, she looked back once, just once. Ash Bluff disappeared behind the hills, and ahead of them lay miles of road, hard choices, and a future still unwritten. But they weren't walking it alone. Not anymore. They didn't speak much on the trail. The land stretched out quiet and dry, the wind pushing against them like it wanted to hold them back. Hank kept one hand on the reins, the other near his rifle. Daisy sat beside him, the rabbit clutched in her lap, staring out at the open road with eyes that no longer looked like a child's. For 2 weeks they traveled, stopping only where the shadows felt thin and the people didn't ask questions. Hank told her they were heading to Kansas, to a place where she could breathe without looking over her shoulder. But Daisy knew better. She could feel it in the way Hank sat straighter every time another rider appeared in the distance, in the way he never let her sleep too far from him, in the way his silence grew heavier the closer they got. One morning, just before dawn, they reached a small town near the edge of the Arkansas border. They'd planned to rest only a day, stock up, and move on. But as soon as they rolled into town, Hank's back stiffened. He saw the signs. Horses tied, too clean. Men who looked too relaxed but had eyes like dogs waiting to bite. There was no mistaking it. Someone had gotten there before them. They took a room above a seamstress's shop and locked the door behind them. Daisy sat cross-legged on the bed, watching Hank clean his pistol. "Are we safe here?" she asked. "Safe enough for now." She studied his face. "You don't believe that?" Hank didn't answer. That night, he left her sleeping and went downstairs to speak to the shopkeeper. A tired woman with graying hair and a scar across her eyebrow met him at the door. "You're being watched," she said, before he even opened his mouth. "I figured. 3 men rode in 2 days ago. They're not here for fabric. You know who they are?" "No, but I know fear. And I've seen too much to pretend it's not real." She paused. "Whatever you're protecting, you'd best move soon." The next morning, the trap closed. They hadn't even made it to the stable when the men showed their faces. 2 on horseback, one already waiting in the alley behind the shop. Hank shoved Daisy behind him, gun drawn, but it was too late. The third man grabbed her, yanking her close with a knife to her neck. "You move," he told Hank, "and she dies." Time stopped. Hank's grip tightened. His mind raced. The man on horseback dismounted, stepping forward slowly. He wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows over his face. But his voice was clear. "Come. You should have left her where we dropped her. We had our reasons." Hank's jaw clenched. "You murdered her mother. She was going to ruin a business that kept dozens of men fed. That girl is evidence, nothing more." Daisy whimpered, blood trickling for where the knife pressed too hard. "She's a child," Hank growled. "Not a secret." The man tilted his head. "You think the law is going to change anything? Boone won't live long. That town's forgotten. But you made this personal." Hank stepped forward. "Let her go." "You first." "Put the gun down." Hank hesitated. Then he did. Slowly, carefully, the revolver hit the dirt. And then Daisy did the unthinkable. She bit the man's hand hard, twisted her small body, and kicked backward. He cried out, stumbling. In the split second that followed, Hank dove forward. 2 shots rang out. The man behind Daisy crumpled. But Hank was hit, just below the ribs. He dropped to one knee, breath gone. Still, he grabbed Daisy and shoved her behind the water trough. Another shot rang out. The man in the alley fell, Clara Beckett standing behind him with a smoking pistol, breath ragged. She hadn't planned to follow. But she had. The last man turned to run, but Boone rode in from the far end of the street, rifle aimed. "Don't," he said flatly. "Just don't." And it was over. But not without cost. Hank lay on the dirt, bleeding, one hand pressed tight against the wound. Daisy crawled to his side, tears streaming down her face. "You said you'd always come back," she whispered. "I'm not leaving you," Hank managed. "Not now. Not ever." Clara knelt beside them, pressing cloth to the wound. "Help's coming. You just hold on." He nodded, barely. Boone kept the last man cuffed. "We'll bring the whole damn ring down now," he said. "That girl's testimony is enough. And you bought us time, Hank." But Hank didn't hear him. His eyes were locked on Daisy's. The next 3 days blurred. Hank was taken to a small clinic in the hills. The bullet hadn't killed him, but it came close. Daisy sat by his bed, never letting go of his hand. Clara stayed, too, watching over them both. On the 4th day, he woke fully. "You stayed," he rasped. Daisy squeezed his hand. "You're my forever home. I'm not going anywhere." That was when the last truth came out. Clara pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat. It had been found in the coat of the man who grabbed Daisy. It was a ledger, names, towns, routes, dates, and one name stood out among them. Martha Lawson. Hank's chest went still. He opened the ledger. The date matched the day his wife disappeared. Years ago, during a ride to deliver medicine to a nearby camp. She never died in a storm, Clara said quietly. She was taken. Daisy looked up. Was she one of them? Hank shook his head. No, she fought them. That's why she never came back. His entire world cracked open again. But it made sense now. The pain, the silence, the rage he'd carried for years. It had a name, a face, and now it had justice. By the end of the week, federal marshals arrived. The ring was dismantled, names called out, men arrested. Boone testified. So did Clara. And when Daisy stood before the judge, voice shaking but strong, the courtroom fell silent. She told him everything. What she saw, what she remembered. The judge placed a protective order on her name. New identity, new home, but she didn't want a new name. "I'm Daisy Lawson now," she told him. "And I always will be." That night, back in their small rented room, Hank watched her fall asleep for the first time in peace. He stepped outside, looking up at the stars, the wind tugging at his coat. Martha was gone, but her voice echoed in Daisy's strength. And though he'd lost everything once, this time, he'd found it again. Not in a wife, not in a home, but in a promise made under a dying sun. That no child should face the dark alone. And he'd keep that promise, no matter the cost. Ash Bluff never quite returned to what it was before. After the arrests and the fire and the bodies buried without names, the town began to shift, slowly, like soil settling after a quake. Some folks left, others stayed, but carried a new kind of silence. The saloon played softer music. The schoolhouse stayed open, but Genevieve added new rules about strangers and started locking the doors after the bell rang. Boone kept his badge, but he carried 2 pistols now and started writing long letters to lawmakers who never answered back. For Hank and Daisy Lawson, the road after everything felt different. Not just because of the pain, though it lingered, but because they were no longer walking it alone. The air felt lighter somehow, even with everything behind them. The wound Hank took in the alley took weeks to heal. He walked slower now, leaned more on the railings when climbing stairs, and grimaced when he sat too fast. But he was alive, and that meant something. That meant everything. Daisy never left his side. She had her quiet days still, days when she'd stop mid-sentence and drift off into a place only she knew, but they grew fewer with time. Genevieve kept her studies going from a distance, sending small books and writing lessons by post. Clara sent little things too, buttons, scraps of ribbon, old keys with no locks. Things worth keeping, she wrote. Daisy kept them all in a wooden box beside her bed. In Kansas, they found a place, a wide piece of land on the edge of farm, owned by a woman named Rose. Just like Clara said, Rose took in children with no place to go. Some had names they'd forgotten how to write. Others had eyes that darted with fear even when no one was around. But Daisy was different. She wasn't looking for home anymore. She'd already found it. She just needed a safe place to live in it. Rose offered Hank work fixing the barn, mending fence lines, and teaching the boys how to ride without falling off. He did it gladly. The quiet suited him. The earth beneath his boots gave him something solid. And at night, when he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and the stars overhead, he'd sometimes hear Daisy laughing with the other kids. Light, real laughter, and it would stop him cold. Because that sound was proof that healing didn't come all at once. It came in moments, in slivers. In a single laugh under a summer moon. Daisy didn't talk much about her mother after the trial. Not even to Hank. But one day, as they walked past the fields at sunset, she said quietly, "I think she was trying to protect me, all the way to the end." "She did," Hank said. "She got you to me." Daisy thought about that. "I think you were already looking for me. You just didn't know it." Hank didn't answer. He just nodded, heart heavy and full all at once. She was right. He'd been drifting, ghosting from town to town, waiting for something to pull him back into the world. And it had come wearing a torn dress and asking about her mama. One rainy afternoon, Daisy came in carrying a soaked envelope. It had no name, just a return address, Ash Bluff. Inside was a drawing, charcoal on rough paper. A little girl holding hands with a tall man. Underneath, Clara had written one line. The family we choose is the one that saves us. Daisy pinned it above her bed. Years passed. The pain softened, but the memory never faded. Sometimes Hank would wake with his hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Sometimes Daisy would fall silent for a whole day after hearing a horse ride too close to the fence. But they had each other, and that was enough. One spring morning, Hank was tending the porch when Daisy ran up, breathless, holding a wrinkled letter. "They want to talk to me," she said. "The lawmen. About speaking at the courthouse. For other girls." Hank looked up. "You want to do that?" She nodded. "I want them to know we fight back. That we can win." He stared at her for a long moment. Her hair was longer now, her face older, but her eyes still held the same fire he saw the first time she asked him for help on that dusty trail. "All right," he said softly. "Let's ride." And as they rode east, with the wind behind them and the dust rising at their heels, Hank realized something that filled his chest with a quiet kind of ache. The world hadn't gotten easier, but they learned how to walk through it anyway. Together. They weren't trying to forget anymore. They were remembering the right way. And that, more than justice, more than revenge, was what healing truly looked like.